Hi there, it's Jason from Codemanship with another entry in my series on working with ChatGPT. Um, Now, I've done a bunch of videos already, throwing various sort of pieces of work at it, and it's had some level of success, but nowhere near as much as we might have hoped. But we got some results out of it. So I wanted to step it up a bit. Let's take it up a notch. There was a video that I wanted to do based on what I'd read or heard about GPT-4, that namely that you could feed it images of UI mock-ups or wireframes and have it generate a web page or whatever, generate the code for you. What I've discovered is this is not true. It simply isn't true. It might have that capability. It might have been demonstrated by OpenAI, but that is not available to the public at large. So for now, I can't do that. When I asked GPT-4 about that, it suggested that I describe the UI to it. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a swizz, isn't it? But then I thought, okay, let's knuckle down, Jason. Let's give this a go. So this is for a use case for a system I'm working on at the moment for my business that would allow customers to schedule half-day training workshops. And this is one particular use case. Don't worry too much about the details of the use case because I'm about to illustrate it using a storyboard. But the idea is it's ways that a designated client representative is logged into the system and they can then schedule workshops for their company. So let's go through the storyboard. So I sort of envisaged that at the beginning, the designated representative has a sort of a landing page, or we can call it a console or whatever you want to call it, that shows what workshops they have scheduled. At the beginning here, Angela Reed from Acme Inc. has no workshop scheduled. She clicks on the schedule workshop button. That takes us, this is the meat and potatoes of it. It takes us to this slightly more complicated page where Angela can select the workshop that she wants me to deliver for her company. She can select the demonstration language that she'd like me to use when I deliver the workshop. And then the bit that's non-trivial at the bottom there, we've got a sort of a month calendar view where you can select a date for your workshop and a time slot view, so half-hour time slots for the start time of your workshop. And this is where it gets more specific. We want to be able to show very, very visually, very clearly which dates are not available to select. So if they're grayed out and don't have a link, then you can't click on those. If they're not grayed out and they have a link, then you can select that date for your workshop. The selected date is then highlighted in a sort of a light yellowy orange color. And for each selected date, you can select a start time for your workshop. Again, a similar kind of deal. Time slots that are available have a link. Time slots that are not available are grayed out. And the time slot that you've selected is highlighted in sort of that light yellow, orangey yellow. Okay, so not the most complex user interface in the world, but a non-trivial UI. So I've seen people sort of demonstrating how they've asked GPT to generate very simple UIs. And I thought, yeah, but in the real world, when are they ever that simple? So I thought, let's make this a bit more real world, a real use case, real business rules, real data, etc., etc. So the idea is that Angela selects the 3rd of April, for example, 2023, and then selects 10 a.m., that's UK time, clicks the schedule button, and then that workshop is scheduled with those details for Angela's company. And then there's a separate use case where developers in her company are invited to enroll for that particular workshop, and that kicks off a whole workflow for them. So it's all nice and automated. Anyway, that's what I was hoping to get. I thought I'm going to start with the part that I don't know how to do. The calendar view and the time slot view, I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to do that. So I was thinking, well, it would be good to get GPT-4's help with that. That's the latest large language model from OpenAI. So that was my goal. So I started a conversation. Now this is where the hard part was. There's what we ended up with in the end. Okay, let me just scroll back up to the top of this quite long conversation. Okay, so here's part of the hard part. You have to be very, very precise. You have to try and describe this web page as precisely as you can. So things like the fact that it needs to use Bootstrap, that I'm looking for that kind of look and feel. In the banner, the user's avatar is displayed. Directly to the right of that, the user's name with their company name underneath that. Below the banner, there is a section where the user now I forgot to mention that it's right justified, so it came out not right justified. Below the banner, there is a section where the user selects the workshop and the demonstration language. Choices of workshop are, choice of demonstration language are. Below this section is where the user selects the date and start time for the workshop. The section begins with explanatory text. Choose a workshop date and start time. So I'm trying to describe what I'm seeing in my wireframe as precisely as I can. So there's lots more details then about the logic of the calendar and available and unavailable dates and selecting dates and all that kind of stuff. The colors of backgrounds, clickable links, etc., etc. So really, really precise. Now it took me about half an hour. I had to really think about it. It took me about half an hour to write the specification. So there's a lot of time already spent, a lot of time already invested. Okay. And I made multiple attempts at it to try and get as close as I can to a precise description. Off it goes. It generates the HTML code. Okay, and that's all good. It's Bootstrap. That's what I asked for. Everything's as it should be. There's my user avatar, which doesn't exist, of course. The picture doesn't exist yet. And the right information, Angela Reed, Acme Inc., etc., etc. But then it wimps out. For whatever reason, it wimps out and says that you can add your workshop options here, you can add your language options here, and then going further down, it really wimps out. Add your calendar here, add time slots here, the bit that I was dreading doing. So I was like, well, that's a start though. So I copied and pasted this into my web project, my HTML page. And then I said, look, I want you to do a bit more than this. I'm not working for you, you're working for me. So I asked it if it could write me the code for the calendar view, which it duly did. As you'll see, it's long, it's complex. There's logic in there. There's embedded HTML in there. So there are all kinds of problems with this code. This is how someone who's only just starting out as a front-end developer, or let's face it, some people who've been front-end developers for years, this is how they would probably write this code, or would have written it back in the day. Okay, and we got another long, complicated with lots of formatting and extra stuff in there as well. A bunch of stuff in there, but I pasted it into my project in the place where it's supposed to be, in the script section at the bottom of the page, and it did work. I ended up with a calendar as prescribed. So I was quite impressed with that. I thought, that's not bad. That's not bad. We're going to need to work on this code, but that's not bad. Okay, now I asked it for the actual list of drop-down options. I pasted those in. That seemed to work fine. And then I said, well, what about the time slot selector? It generated the code for that along similar lines to the calendar, but simpler, and pasted that in. And I ended up with, at this point, something like this. So this is the code, or wrong project, it's in WebStorm, Jason. That's one for a future video. So I ended up with this all pasted in there nice and neat. With my build calendar and update calendar and build time slots and so on and so forth. So lots of really quite nasty JavaScript. But when I opened it in the browser, it kind of sort of was in the ballpark, kind of sort of. There's our, on the wrong side of the page because I forgot to tell it that, but there is our user information. There's our list of potential half-day workshops. There's our demonstration languages. I can scroll through. So this was the bit that I was like, well, how do you do that? I've not actually done a calendar in pure HTML and JavaScript before. So I was like, how are we going to do this? And it's done it. Yeah, the weekends are grayed out, as should be expected. There are no links. Days that can be selected are not grayed out. We can select a day like the 4th of April, like that, and it is highlighted in a not quite as light as I'd hoped, but in a light sort of orangey yellow. And then we can select start times. Now, these two controls here are supposed to interact. When I select a date, that's supposed to bring up the time slots that are available for that date. And they were not interacting. So I had to go further with GPT and say, okay, get them to interact, please. So I had to put in an event handler. So we've got an event listener in there for clicking on dates that triggers a change of time slots. Okay, so it refreshes that. A lot of this same as before going on here, which I think sometimes is just for brevity. Sometimes I think genuinely it's because it doesn't know. It's hoping that I know, but we'll get to that later. But anyway, it was kind of working. It's not working anymore because it introduced some problems that we weren't able to fix. So it's kind of broken at the moment, but it kind of got me in the ballpark. At this point, I'd spent maybe an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half with it. So it's invested quite a lot of time. Much of that figuring out what to ask it for, because I am not a front-end developer, as many people will tell you, and therefore that I had to look some stuff up. A bit of odd things going on with the size of columns and stuff, but we can live with that. So it is as prescribed. It's Bootstrap. It's got that Bootstrap look and feel. It's got all the options that I wanted. At one point, these two views here were interacting, so it would change the time slot date that you were looking at. That's, as I said, that's currently broken, and I broke it. And the idea is you click on the schedule button, but of course this is not wired up to anything at the back end, so nothing happens. Okay, so far so good, but the code itself, not entirely happy with that. Tried to get it to figure out. So at one point it was formatting dates in a very unfriendly way. So I was trying to get it to fix that. I'm trying to get it to simplify how it fixed that. It introduced an element that didn't work. This part here didn't seem to work, and we were getting all kinds of problems. And that's the point at which I tried to fix it and it broke. So that's something I need to look, when I do this for real, I'll have to look that up, international date time formats. But anyway, I was not too bothered about that at the moment. Okay, so we get into inevitably being me, Mr. Code Craft. I was going to comment on how messy the code was. So I suggested we sort of break down the responsibilities a bit, which it agreed with. It said, you're right. Thank you for that GPT-4. Of course I'm right. And so it broke it down into a model. And weirdly, it decided to put those methods, originally they were functions, they become methods now, which means, first of all, the internal code in those functions is broken, because you've changed the context and everything has to refer to this dot. So I was going to ask it if it could. This is where I think it's basically hoping I know what's inside that method, because it doesn't. Okay, so it created what it called a model, but build calendar and build time slot contain, as you saw, embedded HTML and formatting. So there's a combination of sort of core logic to the calendar and the time slot view, and then purely display logic. Okay, and it creates a view here that does, that again, same as before, so I think it's hoping I know. And then a controller that wires up all of our listeners and has our event handler on for selecting dates and so on and so forth, which, as I said, is currently broken. Okay, but it's a first attempt, so I'm like, okay. But I feel the need to comment on the fact that build calendar and build time slots are in the model. So it says, no, you're absolutely right. So it takes them out of the model. So the model is now just data. That's usually a red flag. And then it puts them in the view. So it's a bit of a step forward, but as I mentioned here, isn't the problem that build calendar and build time slots contain both core logic and display logic? So then it attempts to separate them, creating these new methods, get calendar days, which it does not explain how they work. Get calendar days, get time slots. So building the logical calendar days, the logical time slots, and then mapping that on with display calendar and display time slots to the HTML. Okay, but it doesn't actually explain what's exactly going on inside those methods. So being lazy Jason, I said, can you show me the core logic for generating calendar days and time slots? It has a go. At this point, the code is really starting to drift. I've seen this so many times. You get to a point in the conversation where its understanding of the code and the actual code are starting to drift apart, and then you find that you more and more you're having to copy and paste the actual code back into the GPT chat window to remind it, no, this is what we're actually working on. But anyway, in we go. It's got these you see the getters there? Okay, that's on the current date, and all kinds of other stuff going on. So it's an improvement on what was there before. and explains what it does then. What's the logic for displaying them? Okay, so at this point it's sort of saying display. So this is a big nasty method here. I'm still not convinced that there isn't a bunch of stuff going on here that needn't really necessarily be going on here. Hooking up our event listeners and all kinds of other stuff, but you know, it's taking us in a reasonable direction. Taking us in a reasonable direction here. I did want to question: do we really need these? Why not just add those as event handlers? And questions like that. But I was kind of losing the will to live at this point. Anyway, so off we went. It made all these changes, and then make this mistake many times. I say, okay, we've been going on with this conversation for a while. You've been suggesting all these changes. I very foolishly have not been copying and pasting them and integrating them to my code. You should, with GPT-4, here's a pro tip. You should always do that. If it gives you something that looks reasonable, copy, paste it into your code, or better still, read it, understand it, and type it into your code. And then test it and make sure that it does actually work. Because we have drifted here. We're quite some way away from where our boat was originally moored. We're far out to sea here, okay? So now we're trying to get a complete source listing. And at this point, you can see that it's forgotten that we were using Bootstrap. It's forgotten a bunch of stuff, in fact. If we take a look at the HTML, it's completely forgotten that there's supposed to be a banner with the user information. It's completely forgotten about the drop-downs for workshop and demonstration language. So at this point, it's kind of inventing its own version of the requirements. Okay, so we can't really use this. It's creating its own style sheet here. There's our model. Again, same as before. It's hoping that we know. Please give a complete source listing. So on we go. It tries. Again, all the stuff that it's forgotten. Tries, and then stops. I stopped it at that point and said, look, please stop putting those placeholders in. Show me the actual code. Blah, blah, blah. Off we go. There's our style sheet again. And it runs out of steam. At that point, we'd hit our interaction limit. So we were well past our context window. We'd hit our interaction limit. So I had to stop anyway. But I kind of left at that point and said, well, I've actually found this part slightly useful in the sense that I can read that JavaScript code and kind of understand how it created that calendar, how it created that list of time slots, and how it connected the two together. So that's the bit I can take away from this, and I should have just asked that in the first place. Should have done the web page myself, and then asked it to do the fiddly bits that I didn't understand how to do, and asked it to show me how to do them, and then I would write my own code based on that, because its code would be absolutely awful. Anyway, so working with a more complex UI, GPT can kind of sort of get me into the ballpark. Not especially happy with the end result on the inside, the code that was written, and the sort of the wrestling I have to do with it to get it all of the way to what I want. It makes it really not worthwhile my time. Again, we find it in this kind of role of Stack Overflow++. How do I do this in JavaScript? How do I do that in HTML? It's good at that level. Once you get into real conversations, once you get into long-form problems, more complex problems where the end result you want is very specific, it hinders more than it helps. And I found this many times. Now, I've got one more GPT Meets video to do before I do the final video, where I'm just going to kind of sum up my experiences with GPT over the last few weeks, and where I see it sitting within my world as a software developer, and potentially within your world, and maybe where it might be going in the future with things like Copilot X, GPT-5, and beyond. But until then, I hope this has given you some ideas or some insights. Take care. Next video hopefully coming this week, where I'm going to set GPT loose on some slightly more complicated business rules in Python and see how it gets on with that. I'll give you a spoiler alert. I've already had that session with it. Didn't go very well. So I hope you look forward to that. See you soon.